But here, when we look at the word hieroglyph, we find that the Greeks were pretty accurate in how they translated the Kemetic term for their language. That when we look at Greek language, hiero means sacred, and glyph means to carve or to carve. Alright, to carve. And so when you put the word hieroglyph together, what you have is sacred carving. Sacred carving. It's a pretty accurate translation for what the people of Kemet called their language. Of course, the people of Kemet didn't call their land Egypt, they called their land Kemet. Kemet means the black land, and this is debatable as to whether they call it the black land because the people who lived on it were black, or because the earth, the soil, the mud that was to flood every year with the Nile would create a very fertile black soil. But so when we're looking at the translation for the word, you know that the Greeks, they translated the language as hieroglyph. But the people of Kemet, they didn't speak Greek, so they didn't call their language hieroglyph. They called their language Medu Necher. Alright? Or Medu, sometimes it's spelled Medu Necher. Not really sure what the vowels were in between the consonants as our linguists will teach us in classes to come. But this is the term that has been used to describe how the people of Kemet, what they call their own language. Now it's very interesting that when you know people from Italy, they speak, what do they speak in Italy? Italian. When you go to France, people in France, they speak. When you go to Germany, people in Germany speak. When you go to Spain, people in Spain speak. Very interesting that the people of Kemet, they didn't speak Kemetian. Very interesting that the people of Kemet, they didn't speak Kemite. Alright? That the word that they took for their language really represents how they saw themselves. And they didn't see themselves, how they saw themselves is really represented in what they called their language. The word Medu means speech, words, or language. And the word Neter means God or divine. Alright? And so when you put those terms together, what you're talking about, Medu Neter means God's speech, God's language, God's words. And this kind of reveals the ancient Kemite perception of themselves. They didn't see themselves as evolving out of the primate. Alright, they didn't see their culture was not primitive as we see it. Alright, in fact, the wondrous nature of their culture, you know, has mesmerized scholars of the world today, that they even suggest, you know, in some of their fascinations, that gods and goddesses came from other atmospheres and other stratospheres to build this culture. And they might be right. They might be right that when we're talking about this culture, and when we're talking about the importance from the documentary of Orion's belt and the star Sirius B, what we call the star Sirius B today, you know, this really reveals the cosmogony of ancient Kemet and what they said about human origins. And when I teach the children and when I teach my classes, I say that, as Dr. Malala Karanga teaches, that the definition of culture is thought and behavior. Thought that leads to behavior. And one of the primary areas of cultural thought is what we call cosmology, or what we also call theology, also referred to as mythology sometimes. Alright? All these terms really mean is how a culture perceives the nature of its relationship with itself and the universe. And if that culture believes in a divine mind that created the universe, then they have a cosmology that goes beyond just a cosmology. They have a theology, because ology means study of, the means God. Alright? And so when we're studying the cosmology of ancient Kemet, You know, the first part of a cosmology is what they call a cosmogony. The first part of a theology is what they call a theogony. And a cosmogony is a culture's perception of how the universe originates. And a theogony is a culture's perception of how the first God humans of that culture descend from the heavens to the earth. And this is essential, this is a central aspect of Kemetic cultures, that you have to look at the culture from its theogony or cosmogony perspective. Looking at that, the people of Kemet, they believe that the universe was created by divine intelligence. And they had several names for the divine intelligence that they said created the universe. One of his most popular names was Ra. Alright, but that's not, from my reading, that's not the oldest of his name. That prior to being referred to as Ra, he was referred to as Atum. Atum, prior to Atum, or prior to Ra also, was the name Amen. Amen. And so at certain times in the history of Kemet, these three terms were combined. Sometimes the creator was referred to as Atum Ra. Sometimes he was referred to as Amen Ra. Alright, but the whole idea of human beings being connected to a divine mind that constructed the universe, that's not something that humanity was taught from Abraham. Or that's not something that humanity was taught from Hebrew culture. That's something that existed in the Nile, even prior to Egyptian culture. That it's important that we know. Well, I'm trying to get to the cosmology at this point. All right, and so to really talk about the cosmology of ancient Egypt, let me give you a handout that I copied from a book from Nile Valley culture called The Book of Knowing the Creations. The Book of Knowing the Creations. And maybe, are y'all all right?
Take your time, Brother Shabazz. Take your time.
Ra's description of his creation. Quite often we talk about Egyptian religion or Egyptian theology or Egyptian culture, Westerners have really given Egyptian culture a bad name. You know, quite often in Western culture we call Egyptian culture polytheistic. And when we call it polytheistic, it kind of suggests to us the suggestion that polytheism in Western culture kind of connotes paganism. Alright? And paganism kind of connotes a culture that doesn't believe in the supreme creator of the universe. Not literally, that's not the literal term, what the term literally means, but that's what it kind of connotes. So these terms are really misnomers when we're talking about ancient Kemet. That as we're reading the Book of Knowing the Creations, we're going to see that the idea that even exists in this culture, what do you call Judeo-Christian Islamic belief? You classify it religiously as monotheistic, or the idea that these cultures produced the idea first that there was just one supreme creator or one creator. But the idea of monotheism, you will see manifest itself right here in the Book of Knowing the Creations. We're reading it just to remind you that this is the oldest deciphered literature in the world. That there is no literature, there's no writing in the world that is older than that which is older in its that has been deciphered, that is older than that which exists in Egypt. There's older undeciphered texts, but that older undeciphered text, that even comes from Africa. That comes from places like Ethiopia. So in Ethiopia, you know, they have the Meroitic scripts that our young scholars are going to have to go and decipher one day and crack the code on. All right, but those Meroitic scripts are actually older than the Egyptian writing, but they have yet to be deciphered.